So Kshama is a professor at Seattle University and also Seattle Central Community College, and she teaches economics. She's also active in her local teachers union, AFT 1789. She's an active member of Socialist Alternative, and she was also a prominent activist within the Occupy Seattle movement. And of course, we're all here today because she's also running for state legislature in the Washington House District 43. So without further ado, I'll let Kshama make a brief statement, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you, media, for being here, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate everybody's presence here. As you all know, the main announcement that we are making today and that we are delighted to make is that we have now officially, as the King County elections are certified, we are now officially eligible to run in position 2 in District 43. And just to give a quick background, we were on the ballot in District 43 in position 1 against Democratic incumbent Jamie Pedersen. But the Stranger newspaper endorsed us as a write-in candidate in position 2 against House Speaker Frank Chopp. And as you all have seen already, I think the results in both positions are really quite impressive for a first-time grassroots openly socialist campaign. If you look at the numbers very quickly, in position 1, where we are running on the ballot, we got 9.04% of the vote, and in position 2, the total write-ins came up to 12.69%. I'm approximating, but I think approximately 11% of the write-ins were for our campaign. And I think that this result shows decisively how much people are hungry for a change. They're hungry for a change from business as usual. And I want to say, the most important thing is that when progressives continue voting for the Democratic Party year after year, it does not really mean that they are really happy with the Democratic Party's agenda. The results in most elections for decades, what they have shown is that progressives don't have an alternative. They don't have a real choice in elections. And I think that this campaign is a really good example of a real choice, a real option. I mean, we're running against the Democratic Party, which has held the governorship and majorities in the House and Senate in this state for decades. And what have we got in return for our support? We've got decades of cuts to education and social services, particularly massive cuts in these last 4 years in the name of the recession. We've seen basic health getting decimated. We've seen disability services being decimated. The tuition at University of Washington and Seattle Central Community College have skyrocketed. So we've seen decades of redistribution of wealth from the poor, the low income, and the middle class to the super wealthy and big business, and massive subsidies to big business. And we are running this campaign as a challenge to that kind of big business agenda that both the Democrats and the Republicans are party to. And we are delighted. We welcome the opportunity to run against Chopp, particularly because he's had a long legislative career of presiding over cuts after cuts. He's the House Speaker. He's the second most powerful Democrat in the state, and as such, I think that will allow this grassroots campaign to achieve a higher media profile. But at the same time, I want to be clear that as we have always been consistent, our campaign and our movement is not just against one individual or another. We are being very clear that all these problems that our state is seeing, the regressive tax system and the massive jobs crisis, these are all problems that the Democratic Party as a whole is culpable for. And both Pedersen and Chopp have almost an entirely similar voting record. The political distance between Pedersen and Chopp is microscopic. So we are going to continue to make that point, and we are going to be running a really vigorous and energetic grassroots campaign, and we're already seeing more and more people wanting to get involved, getting in touch with us, because they're finally happy to see politics as they really want it. I think this campaign, even though we have just crossed the primaries and entering the general elections, has already been quite successful. And one of the landmark achievements of this campaign has been the endorsement of the King County Metro Drivers Local, which is Amalgamated Transit Union Local 587. And I think that has to be highlighted, because the reason they supported our campaign, by a large majority, almost a unanimous rank and file vote, is that we are the only campaign who are raising that there is more than enough money in this state to pay for public transit. And yes, yet public transit is being completely ripped apart. And neither the Democrats nor the Republicans are really standing up for public transit, nor are they standing for education or healthcare or anything like that. And the reason I'm highlighting this is that labor movement, the unions, have not only voted for the Democrats for decades, but they have poured in hundreds of millions of dollars into the Democratic campaigns nationally, not just in this state. And they have, provided tens of thousands of volunteers to do legwork for the Democrats. But what have they got in return? The labor movement has been given the shaft over and over and over again by the Democrats. And my appeal to the labor movement is, look, follow the lead of ATU and break from the Democrats. The labor movement needs to stand up for itself. Workers like myself and all of us, we need to stand up for ourselves, and we need to create a political alternative for ourselves and stop, believing in this myth that the Democrats are going to come through for us. And lastly, I will say that often people will say, you're talking about all these things, aren't these pie in the sky? And I have a response to that. I will say that if you believe that the Democrats are going to come through for you, then you're believing in pie in the sky.
Can you tell me then why you chose to run against Chopp instead of Pedersen?
We were originally intending to run against Chopp, like I said, because he is much more clearly associated in people's minds with the massive budget cuts and the state that the economy is in, that students and the elderly and disabled and women are put in. But we found out that another independent anti-budget cuts, pro-labor candidate was running against Chopp. And for us, this campaign is about providing a tool for building movements, for building stronger social movements on the left. And we didn't want to run against another left candidate. And so we moved, in the interest of solidarity with the left, we moved to the other race, against Jamie Pedersen. But like I said, we are very clearly pointing out that both Pedersen and Chopp are responsible, like all the other Democrats, including Gregoire and everyone else, are responsible for the state that the economy is in, that our lives are in. But because of the stranger endorsement and because of our really energetic campaigning, by this phenomenal campaign team that we have here, we were able to garner enough votes, write-ins in position 2 that are allowing us to run. So we feel that it will really bring us a high-profile campaign.
So who was the candidate who you stepped aside for originally?
Gregory Gadda, who has since, long since withdrawn from the race.
Did he withdraw before the primary?
Well, he withdrew before August 7th, yes. But he was on the ballot. And actually, I will also...
He withdrew after the filing deadline.
After the filing deadline. So that's why he was on the ballot. Yeah, please go ahead, Chris.
Could you say something about the state regulation, the state law that is saying you cannot identify your organization that is supporting you and running your campaign on the ballot? They won't print that?
Yes, just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about, the Washington Administrative Code, which is like a guideline that interprets the state law, says that if you are an undeclared write-in, which we were, then you can't state your party preference in the general election. And while it's clear to us what the spirit of the law is, in this case, it's a very exceptional situation because the voters know very clearly that I am running as a socialist alternative candidate because I was running in position 1. And in fact, if you look at the ballot, the way it was placed, position 1 was just 2 centimeters above position 2. And for everybody who voted for us as a write-in, it's very clear that we're running a socialist alternative. And so we really strongly think that the Secretary of State should make an exception in this case.
According to the Stranger newspaper, they've reported that the Secretary of State has discretion and actually exercised discretion. And most recently, I think we're looking into actively right now. We have a lawyer beginning to look into the issue of previous precedents of the Secretary of State choosing to interpret the administrative code liberally at different times. So our opinion is we think that he does have the right to do that. But very recently, he decided to allow Mitt Romney on the Washington state ballot for the 2012 presidential elections when the Stranger's reporting, we haven't looked into it enough to know ourselves, but the Stranger's reporting, if you look at the WAC code by the letter of the law, which is not the law, by the letter of the code, Mitt Romney actually was not eligible because the Republicans did not run an official Republican candidate in the 2010 U.S. Senate elections. But in that case, the Secretary of State felt the code did not need to be precisely applied.
Are you worried that the lack of party identification will hurt you?
We believe that we have the right. We don't see whose interest does it serve to hide from the voters who our candidate is. What is to be gained by doing this? What is the spirit that this is fulfilling? The spirit of a law that where voters intend to state. Voters intended to vote for a socialist alternative candidate. When they wrote in Kshama Sawant, we filed at a political filing with the state as a socialist alternative candidate. We were endorsed by the Stranger saying we were a socialist alternative candidate. By what does it serve to hide that? Maybe it helps the two-party system to pretend there's not other political challenges. I don't know what's in Sam Reed's mind. Maybe it's just bureaucratic convenience. But the bottom line is the democratic right of our campaign and the voters is to know who they're voting for and our right to tell the voters who we are.
Yeah, we find that restriction fundamentally undemocratic, and we're actually making an appeal to the community to call, tweet, and email Sam Reed's office. Sam Reed is the Secretary of State, and tell him that he needs to allow us to put our party preference on the ballot.
I think we'd also want to make clear that we're looking forward to a series of debates with Frank Chopp, and we expect the voters of this district have the right to have a democratic election. Frank Chopp is not the king of the 43rd district. He does not have the right to a coronation. He does not own this seat. He may be his paymasters think they do own it in the corporate cash he's getting from Boeing and Microsoft and the real estate industry and law firms and the medical industry. But I think the voters and working people of Seattle have a different idea. So we're looking forward to a series of debates with Frank Chopp. And we also would point out, Frank Chopp is not only the Speaker of the House, he's also the chair of the Budget Committee in the State House. I'm sorry, that was incorrect. It's incorrect, I apologize. But his position on the various issues in Washington State, the State House, have been, I would say, way to the right of the voters of the 43rd District. The 43rd District is one of the most progressive districts in the state, where there's overwhelming support for a tax on the super wealthy, where there's overwhelming support for single-payer health care, there's overwhelming support for free higher education, for cancellation of student debt, for expanding metro public transit rather than cutting funds and actually raising the fares. And our campaign is actually based on all the ideas that actually the vast majority of voters in the 43rd, and I would say actually all working people of Washington, there's a real debate and real discussion would support the idea that we should have a massive expansion of public transit. We should be lowering fares, not raising them. We should be taxing Boeing, not giving it handouts. We should be taxing Microsoft and Amazon and Starbucks rather than giving them corporate welfare.